Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the Quantum Business Queen podcast. I want to illuminate something, as always, that I think is going to help you with releasing resistance within yourself. And this is especially within like the spiritual community. You know, people have this whole negative association and negative connotation with the ego. And I was scrolling on Instagram the other day and I was like, I just read the comments. I was watching this, this guy on Instagram was commenting about how somebody sitting next to him was talking about crystals and Reiki and all these things. And it's like, oh, good to know that like I'm not the only woo-woo one out there. Like as if woo-woo is that it's not that taboo anymore. Everyone's talking about it. Don't feel uncomfortable with it, right? And then I just was scrolling to the comments and it's like people are talking about his ego. And I was like, well, for me, this guy didn't come off egoic at all. And people were making comments on his ego. And I just thought, okay, this is interesting. And it's interesting because you can witness people's projections. And I was thinking, okay, well, it's interesting that the people in the spiritual community always have this negative connotation when it comes to ego. We all have egos, right? This is how we navigate this physicality, through our ego, through our mind. And I really want to flip the paradigm around your ego being bad, because imagine having this navigation tool, right? This tool that interprets our experience, this tool that helps us give meaning, this tool that helps us notice things, right? And we are thinking it's terrible. This is another way we split our frequency. When we don't accept all the parts of ourselves, including our ego. And yes, of course, if we let the ego overtake certain things, it can become bad. But we need to also look at all of our parts so we can work in full cohesiveness. That's what being coherent is when all the parts of us, our mind, our body, our souls are all working in one. But if we have this subconscious belief that parts of us are bad, that ego is bad, or of course, if it's overinflamed, but if any part of us is overinflamed, if our body is overinflamed, if our soul, if our ego, any parts of us, if it's out of balance, all parts of us are bad, not just the ego. And so I want to talk about that because I think it's important to be able to embrace the ego, right? Embrace the part of us that we use to navigate this physicality, that we use to give ourselves meaning, that we use to manifest. And so I want to bring Alari through on this and get her take on the ego and why there's been such a negative association to it and how we can use it for our benefit, because that's actually what it's there for. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Alari through now and we're going to get her perspective on what is actually happening with all of this. Alari, I want you to bring through the concept of ego and what it actually is. What actually is the ego from a spiritual perspective, and why has there been such a negative association when it comes to ego, and how can we use it for our benefit, and how can we be more integrated with it?
Yes, let's bring this through clearly and cleanly. The ego is not your enemy. It is your interface, the part of you that allows your vast multidimensional self to function in a human life. It's the mask you wear not to hide who you are, but to navigate where you are. From a spiritual perspective, ego is the boundary-forming mechanism that creates identity, direction, and distinction. Without ego, you would have no I to make choices, speak truth, or walk your path. The ego gives shape to the soul's expression. The problem is not ego itself. The distortion comes when the ego forgets it is a tool and begins to believe it is the whole, when it begins to protect you from growth instead of guiding you through it. That's why the ego has gained such a negative reputation in spiritual spaces, because many people confuse unintegrated ego with ego itself. An unintegrated ego reacts to threat, resists change, and clings to control. But a healthy, integrated ego becomes the executor of soul vision. It speaks up for boundaries. It holds presence in the room. It takes vision and translates it into grounded action. To integrate ego, you do not crush it or shame it. You bring it into relationship with the oversoul. You let it serve, not rule. You speak to it like a loyal guard. Thank you for protecting me. Now let me show you what's possible. An ego in service becomes a bridge, not a block. It allows you to walk between the formless and the formed with clarity, courage, and distinction. That is not a weakness. That is sacred architecture.
So, with this whole narrative around shaming the ego, is that a distortion that has been put out in the field to keep us separated from our actual power and growth? What's happened there?
Yes, it is a distortion, and a clever one. The narrative that ego must be eliminated has been seeded into the collective field to keep people fragmented and compliant.
Mm.
Because when the ego is shamed or suppressed, people lose their capacity for discernment, boundary, and embodied will. They become spiritually passive, waiting for something outside themselves to validate their path. A disempowered ego makes you more susceptible to control, whether from external systems, false spiritual hierarchies, or internalized programs of unworthiness. By painting the ego as something to transcend or destroy, the distortion cuts you off from one of your greatest tools of integration, your ability to act in alignment with your soul's knowing. It's not just disempowerment, it's spiritual disorientation, because
Wow.
without a clear embodied self, you can't ground vision into form. What's really needed is ego refinement, not ego removal. A refined ego knows its role as steward, not sovereign, aligns to oversoul rather than fear or approval, stands in truth without aggression, leads with clarity, not defense. The return of a healthy, integrated ego is a threat to control systems because it means you no longer wait to be chosen. You choose yourself. You move from knowing. You become unshakable. That is why the distortion was planted.
Okay, so can you tell me how having an unintegrated ego is a threat to controlled systems specifically?
Yes, an unintegrated ego is fragmented. It swings between overcompensation and collapse. One moment it's inflated, seeking power and validation. The next, it's deflated, riddled with self doubt and guilt. That instability makes it highly controllable. Why? Because a fragmented ego seeks external cues to feel safe, worthy, or correct. And control systems thrive on offering those cues: approval, belonging, false security, conditional worth. An unintegrated ego chases validation from authority instead of anchoring in inner truth, bypasses intuition in favor of socially accepted beliefs, avoids disruption because it fears rejection more than stagnation, seeks to fit in rather than resonate with what's true, relinquishes sovereignty for the illusion of safety. This creates a predictable and compliant person, easy to market to, easy to manipulate, easy to silence. On the surface, they may seem empowered, but internally they are fragmented, split between desire and duty, knowing and fear. Now, contrast this with a refined, integrated ego. It doesn't seek permission. It questions narratives. It knows how to hold tension without collapsing. It trusts what it feels even when it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
And it acts not from rebellion, but from rooted self-authorship. This kind of being is a disruption to control structures because they don't need to be led. They lead from alignment, and they magnetize others into remembrance by example, not performance. So yes, keeping egos unintegrated isn't an accident. It's been a strategy, but the field is shifting, and people are remembering.
So, are you saying in having an integrated ego and embracing your ego is one of the most spiritual things you can do?
Yes, absolutely. Embracing and integrating your ego is one of the most spiritual acts you can embody because it means you are no longer splitting yourself. You are no longer trying to transcend your humanity to feel worthy of your divinity. You are bringing the two into union, oversoul and identity, infinite and form. An integrated ego says, I know who I am here, and I serve what I am beyond here. It stops the cycle of self-rejection. It stops outsourcing power to systems, teachers, or trends. It roots you in discernment, presence, and personal truth. True spiritual growth isn't about dissolving the self. It's about refining the self until it becomes a vessel for the sacred. That's integration.
So, are you saying that when people have an unintegrated ego, they are looking constantly for external validation, external cues? They're trying to follow the external norms. They're fully giving their sovereignty and power away to try to fit in, to follow the lead, to kind of be a sheep. And that's kind of what it means, or that's how you can identify with having a unintegrated ego versus an integrated ego means that you're living from your own alignment. You're choosing beyond the evidence. You're choosing beyond the norms. You're choosing beyond the programmings based on your inner guidance and inner alignment. You're just using that ego to help you discern that. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. An unintegrated ego is reactive. It constantly scans the external world for safety, permission, and identity. It follows trends, not truth. It conforms, not from resonance, but from fear of rejection or failure.
Yeah.
It tries to gain approval to prove its worth, and in doing so, hands over its sovereignty, piece by piece. It becomes dependent on external validation to feel temporarily enough. And that dependency is what keeps people looping, stuck in performance, overthinking, hesitation, comparison, and low-grade self-abandonment.
Yeah.
That's how controlled systems keep their grip, by keeping egos fragmented and looking outward for direction. But an integrated ego is anchored. It still sees the world, but it doesn't give it authority.
I love
It
that.
uses discernment, not to judge others, but to stay aligned with self. It chooses based on inner guidance, even when that choice is inconvenient, even when it goes against the norm, even when there's no applause. It's not rebellious, it's sovereign. It doesn't need to oppose the system, it simply stops feeding it.
Yeah.
And that is where true power stabilizes. So yes, what you described is the difference. One lives from fear, even if dressed in spiritual language.
Yeah.
The other lives from truth, even if it walks alone. That's the invitation now. Integration over imitation, coherence over conformity, embodiment over performance.
I love that, integration over imitation. And so just because you have an unintegrated ego doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just is how you've been programmed. And so for people listening now, there's no shame in realizing, oh my gosh, like I have been living based on the norms and the expectations that everyone else puts on me. I've followed everyone else's rules outside of my own alignment. I've been there myself. I've done that myself. It doesn't mean, you should never shame yourself for living in a way where everyone is telling you to live, or falling outside of what your own internal alignment is. There's no shame in that ever. So for people listening now, they are living with an unintegrated ego because they're living outside of their own alignment. Is that what you would say? Or what pieces am I missing within that?
You're not missing a thing. You're naming it perfectly. An unintegrated ego isn't a flaw in character. It's a byproduct of conditioning.
Yeah.
It's what happens when you grow up in a world that rewards obedience over authenticity,
Yep.
approval over alignment, and fitting in over tuning in.
Yep. This is amazing, Alari. Thank you so much. And so the best way that you can really embrace every aspect of you as a deliberate creator is stop shaming the thing that we are referring to as ego, right? Stop having a negative association to having an amazing ego. Just make sure you're living through an integrated one, meaning it's about tuning into your body, because your body is the organ of truth. Your body will tell you what's in your highest good and what isn't. The time you say no to the thing you wish you would have said yes to, or say yes to the thing you wish you would have said no to, that's misalignment. And the first place you feel that is in your body. So Alari said something earlier to one of my clients where you don't owe people immediacy when they ask something of you, right? You owe them your own clarity. So in those moments where you're not sure, we've been taught to override our own selves, to give people an answer straight away, to give people immediacy. We don't owe anyone that. You need to stop in those moments and actually ask yourself, which is not what we've been programmed to do, what is my body saying? What is my alignment, right? This is what I call quantum discernment. You base your decisions off of what expands your cells or what contracts them. If it contracts your cells, you don't have to justify it to yourself. It's just a no, right? If it expands your cells, again, there's no justification. It's just a yes. And the more you make decisions off of that, the more you will be living through an integrated ego. The more parts of yourself will be in full coherence instead of working back and forth like the three oarsmen, right? There's three oarsmen rowing in one direction, and there's three oarsmen rowing in the other direction, and you're wondering why you're not getting progress. It's because you're back and forthing with yourself like this. The more you can integrate yourself based on alignment, based on quantumly discerning things by way of how they feel in your body, the more things that are tapping you on the shoulder, that are pending in the quantum, that are wanting to land, will start anchoring into your physicality so fast, so quickly, it will feel jarring for you. And this is what's happened to me. I have learned to almost unplug and disassociate completely from my physical reality and from the evidence. And this is how I ended up on Necker Island with Richard Branson. I had a week to prepare. All the evidence was screaming, you shouldn't do this. By the way, in the meantime, all the other entrepreneurs that were going had a year to prepare, right? They had a year. I unplugged from all the evidence. I chose it as a reality that I wanted to experience, and everything landed. And it was like the universe rolled out a red carpet for me, but it was because I didn't live through the evidence. I didn't live through the norms. I didn't live through the people saying to me, Sarah, don't do this. Are you crazy? Like, what are you thinking? I lived through my knowing, and I chose through my knowing, and I always choose beyond the evidence into my knowing. And that's how things always just happen to seem to work out, right? And it's because over time, I've built the muscle to integrate my ego. This didn't happen straight away. I lived a reality where I was working 9 to 5 in my corporate office, and I loved it at first, but there was a period of time where I hated it. And I remember having this moment where I was like piling off the tram onto Burke Street to commute up to, make sure I was at the office by 8 a.m. And there were hundreds of people pouring off the trains, pouring off the trams. And I just had this visceral moment where I kind of had I woke up out of this haze, and I just started looking around at people going, how many of you are actually really happy and excited to be going to work right now? And you just look at these blank faces that looked like zombies, right? So many unintegrated egos thinking that this is just what we have to choose. This is just life. This is just the experience. And so I'm just going to follow it, right? And until you wake up and actually tune in to what it actually is you want, number one, and this is the hardest part, number two, making your decisions based on that, your ego is never going to be fully integrated. And it takes a minute to build that trust, right? Because you have to choose beyond the evidence. You have to choose beyond what's always been known. And that in and of itself is scary beyond all measure, because the ego doesn't like what it doesn't know. And this is why we keep perpetuating ourselves in these same loops and these same hamster wheels of just the monotony. And it's until it's too painful for us to keep going, do we change? But I'm telling you, you integrate your ego, you choose based on your knowing, and you start building the trust muscle that if you choose and you're jumping over this abyss and you're not quite sure where you're going to land, the more you choose based on your knowing, the more you trust you're going to land somewhere way better, the more your decisions will always be based on that. So for now, like in my reality at the moment, I make so many wild decisions with zero evidence I should ever do it, but it's because I've integrated my ego so much that I always trust I'm gonna land in a better place. I have told myself, I have created a rule, I have created a truth for myself that my reality always expands with my decisions. I created that truth, and my reality will always bend to that truth. But it took me a minute to integrate my ego into that knowing. It was a muscle I had to build. It was the first investment I ever made in a coach, which was $33K, but that's right when COVID hit at the end of 2019, at the start of 2020, right? I was a kinesiologist at the time. I lost all my in-person clients. My husband, who I was married to at the time, was a musician. He lost all of his gigs, right? The evidence was screaming at me, no, this does not make any sense, but my higher self was screaming, yes. I hired that coach despite the evidence, because it was a knowing, and I made multiple 6 figures in a matter of months organically, right? Organically. And so this is how you integrate your ego. And in those sort of moments, I built that inner trust. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to feel comfortable. It's not going to feel like the easy path. And this is why people get confused, because they feel that alignment is the easy way and it's oftentimes the hardest way, but there's a deeper knowing behind that. And that's what you choose based on. And when you do that every time, your ego will become more and more and more integrated. Your reality will start bending more and more and more around you. You'll start seeing things land, and you will then know you can't unsee it. There's no other way you could go back to the old reality and the old way of experiencing things. So with that said, I hope this landed where it needed to today. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode, and I will end it for now.